It was 2 in the morning when I heard the garage door open. I was sitting in the dark at the kitchen table, lights off, coffee cold, my laptop glowing in front of me even though I hadn't touched the keyboard in an hour. The sound of that creaky garage door, louder than usual in the stillness, pulled my focus from the same spreadsheet I'd been pretending to look at all night. She was supposed to be home by midnight. That was the arrangement. "It's just a girls' night," she'd said, tossing it out like it was no big deal while applying mascara in the hallway mirror 3 hours earlier. I didn't question it then, not out loud, but I sure as hell didn't believe it. My wife hates going out with her girlfriends. She always says they gossip too much, spend too much money, and she's not in the mood for loud music and overpriced wine. But tonight, for whatever reason, she had a sudden craving for all of that. I heard the key rattle in the back door, followed by the usual clatter of her heels against the tile as she stepped inside. She didn't see me at first. She was already halfway across the kitchen when her eyes adjusted to the dark and landed on me. She flinched just slightly, then quickly composed herself, forcing a tired smile. "Jesus, babe, you scared me. Why are you sitting here in the dark like a damn ghost?" "I was waiting." She dropped her purse on the counter, like always, but didn't take off her shoes. Her coat stayed on too, unzipped just enough for me to see the shimmer of something underneath. Not a t-shirt. Not the hoodie she left the house in earlier. This was a dress, tight, black, low-cut. One I hadn't seen before. One that she definitely didn't own last week when I accidentally opened her half of the closet looking for my gym bag. "Waiting for what?" she asked, her voice soft but cautious now, like she was already preparing her next lie. "For you to tell me why you changed clothes in your car." Her face didn't flinch this time. I'll give her that. She was good. Real good. She turned toward the fridge, opened it, then closed it without grabbing anything. Just needed the motion, I guess, to buy her some time. Her fingers tapped against the door handle. "I didn't change in the car. What are you even talking about? You left wearing a hoodie, jeans, and those scuffed white sneakers. You came back in heels and a dress you've never worn in front of me. So I'll ask again, where did you change?" She stood there, facing the fridge like it held the answer. Then she turned back to me, arms crossed, mouth in a tight line. "Okay, so what if I did change? I knew you'd ask a million questions, and I didn't feel like dealing with it. I wanted to feel sexy for once, all right? Not like someone's damn roommate. Is that so horrible?" "It's not horrible," I said, standing slowly. "It's just funny, considering you said you were going to a quiet dinner with Lindsay and Clara at that vegan place you hate. You checked up on me? I drove by the restaurant at 10. You weren't there." Her lips parted, ready to shoot back with something fast, but I cut her off. "And I found your gym bag in the trunk of your car. You used it to carry the dress, right? That and the heels. Switched everything out at that gas station 2 blocks away. I watched you do it from across the street." The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was hollow, empty, like a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. "All right, fine," she finally said, dropping her arms, looking tired rather than guilty. "You caught me. You want a medal or something?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her, really looked. Noticed how her makeup was smudged near her left eye. How the lipstick was faded in the center but perfect on the edges, like she'd reapplied just the outline. I noticed the faintest smell of cologne that didn't belong to me. One of those woodsy types that teenage boys wear when they're trying too hard to impress someone older. "Was it worth it?" I asked. "Whatever it was you were doing. Was it worth lying to me? Dressing up for someone else? Walking back in here like nothing happened?" "Don't do this right now," she said, suddenly looking past me like she couldn't stand to meet my eyes anymore. "I'm not in the mood for some jealous interrogation." "Jealous?" I laughed. "No, I'm done being jealous. I'm just trying to understand who the hell I've been living with." She looked back at me then, for real this time, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, just calculation. She was trying to decide how much truth would be too much. How much she could admit without breaking the entire dam wide open. "Let it go, Dan," she said. "Just let it go, please." But I couldn't. Not now. And I wouldn't. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I told my manager I was sick, which wasn't even a lie. I felt like I hadn't slept at all, and whatever rest I did get felt like I was just blinking with my eyes closed. Melissa had already left by the time I got up. No note. No text. Nothing. Just her coffee mug in the sink, lipstick still on the rim, and her usual breakfast bar wrapper tossed on the counter. She left it all there like it was any other morning, like we hadn't said what we said the night before, like the truth she gave me in pieces wasn't still sitting in the kitchen with me while I stared at her empty chair. For hours I just sat there, trying to figure out what exactly I knew. Because knowing she changed in her car and lied about who she was with wasn't the whole story, and I knew damn well that if she'd been hiding this, she'd been hiding more. I just didn't know how deep it went yet. I needed to know. I needed to get the rest of it, not for closure or any of that garbage people talk about, but because I couldn't sit in my house like a fool not knowing what else I had missed. There's a small drawer in her side of the closet, tucked underneath her jewelry case, and it's where she kept things she didn't want getting mixed up in the daily clutter. Receipts, old appointment cards, empty checkbooks. That drawer was always half stuck, but I'd seen her open it 1,000 times. I pulled it open and started going through it, not even sure what I expected to find. There was a movie stub from 3 weeks ago for a theater nowhere near our house, and we hadn't been to a movie together in months. I kept digging and found 2 valet tickets from a steakhouse downtown that I hadn't been to since my brother's birthday last year. One of them was dated 2 Saturdays ago. That same weekend she claimed she was at a conference. I had stayed home that whole time because of a last-minute project for work. I remember she didn't answer her phone that Saturday afternoon, said she had it on silent during the seminar. But valet? Steakhouse. In the very back of the drawer, I found the real answer. A receipt folded twice with the name of a small hotel near the edge of the city. Nothing fancy, just enough privacy. The kind of place someone books when they want to be alone, but not too far from everything. The name on the receipt wasn't hers. It wasn't mine either. I stared at it for a long time, running through every guy she worked with or knew socially, and it didn't click. It wasn't until I remembered her friend Natalie's birthday party last summer that I made the connection. That guy. The one she introduced to me as just someone from work. I barely remembered his name at the time, but it matched. Same spelling. Same casual confidence when he shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. When she got home that night, I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to see how she would act. She came in, tossed her keys on the counter, gave me a quick glance like we were roommates again, and walked straight into the bathroom to wash her hands. I watched her the whole time from the kitchen. She dried her hands slowly, looking at herself in the mirror longer than usual. Maybe she felt it too, that something was off, that the game was coming to an end. So, steakhouse on 12th and Grant, I said loud enough for her to hear through the hallway. She froze. I saw it in the mirror's reflection. I don't know what you're talking about, she said without turning around. You were there 2 Saturdays ago. Valet ticket was in your drawer. Why were you going through my stuff? Because I'm tired of guessing who the hell I'm living with. That's why. She came back into the kitchen, slowly, like she was still trying to figure out how much I really knew. Her arms crossed, but not in a defensive way. More like she was cold or uncomfortable in her own skin. It's not what you think. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly the kind of thing people say when they know it's exactly what you think. Tell me what it is then. Explain the receipt. Explain the hotel. Explain why the hell you've been lying to me for months. She didn't speak right away. She walked to the counter, picked up the mug she left that morning, rinsed it, and placed it upside down on the drying rack. His name is Eric. He's from work. We were working late on a few projects, and things just started. You mean you started sleeping with him? It wasn't like that. Not at first. It never is. I didn't plan for it to happen. I didn't look for it. I stared at her as she spoke, and I realized she really believed that mattered. That somehow not planning to cheat made it better. Like it wasn't betrayal unless she'd scheduled it on her calendar. You could have just told me you weren't happy, I said. You didn't have to treat me like I'm some idiot. I didn't want to hurt you. I stepped closer, not enough to scare her, just enough to make her see I wasn't going to let this slide into some soft conversation where we pretend everything is fine. Melissa, you did hurt me. You made that decision every time you left this house and lied about where you were going. Don't act like this was some kind of accident. She opened her mouth like she had more to say, but she didn't. And that told me everything. It started with her saying she didn't want to talk anymore, that she was too tired, and this conversation could wait until morning. That's when I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because she still thought she had control over the timing. She thought she could cheat, lie, get caught, and then choose when to deal with it. I wasn't about to go to bed pretending this was a conversation we could sleep on and revisit when she felt rested. I told her we were going to have it now, while the lies were still fresh in the air, while I still gave a damn about her answers. She sat down at the table, slowly, like she was stepping into something dangerous. That was the first honest thing she did all day. So how long has it been going on? I asked, and she looked down like the table had the answer. I don't know exactly. A few months. I leaned forward, trying to stay calm, trying to hold back the impulse to throw the damn chair across the room. You don't know exactly? Was it before our anniversary or after? She hesitated. That pause told me what I already knew. It started before. You mean while we were sitting in that cabin, drinking wine, and pretending like we were reconnecting, you were already fucking someone else? She flinched, but didn't deny it. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I didn't plan it. You didn't trip and fall into a hotel room, Melissa. You made choices. You kept making them. She tried to reach for my hand across the table, but I pulled it back. The idea of her touching me made my stomach turn. She looked hurt by that, as if I was being cold, as if I owed her something now that the truth was out. He listens to me, she said, which sounded like something she'd rehearsed in her head 100 times before she finally said it aloud. Don't give me that crap. You could have told me anything. You chose not to. You wouldn't have understood. I would have understood being unhappy. I would have understood if you told me you needed more. What I don't understand is how you can live with someone every day and still lie to their face. She sighed and looked around the room like she was trying to disappear into it. Then her voice dropped, quieter than before. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought it would be a distraction, a way to feel something again, and then I'd come back to what we had. So I'm the safe fallback? The boring comfort zone you crawl back to once you're done getting your fill of excitement? I didn't say that. You don't have to. It's already clear. She pushed back her chair and stood up, but I told her to sit down. She did, reluctantly. What did you do with him? Don't give me vague answers. Tell me where you went, how often. I want to hear it. What difference does it make? It makes a difference to me. She swallowed hard, eyes darting around like she was searching for a softer version of the truth, but I wasn't giving her that out. The hotel twice. Once at his place. We met for dinner, drinks, but it wasn't always about sex. So you talked, shared feelings, laughed together while I was home thinking you were just tired from work? She didn't respond. That silence was her answer. And the nights you came home late, smelling like perfume that wasn't yours, with lipstick smudged, and said you were just working late. That was him too? Some of those nights, yes. I stood up, not to intimidate her, but because I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed to move, to do something with the anger crawling under my skin. Did you ever think about how this would end? Or were you just going to keep sneaking around until you got bored? I didn't think that far ahead. Of course not. Because thinking ahead would mean admitting you were destroying everything. I didn't want to destroy anything. You just wanted both. A marriage and a boyfriend. A husband to pay the bills, and a guy to make you feel special. That's what you wanted. Her face hardened for a moment, like she was tired of being the one in the hot seat. You weren't perfect either. You've been distant for months. You act like a roommate more than a husband. Because I knew something was off. I was trying to figure out why the woman I married started looking at me like I was a stranger. She stood up again, this time not to leave but to pace around like she needed to move through her guilt. Do you love him? I asked. She stopped walking. That was the question she didn't want to hear. No, she said quietly. Did you tell him you did? She paused again. Yes, once. I laughed, shaking my head, hands on my hips. That's great. That's just fucking great. I didn't mean it. You said it. That's all that matters. She sat back down, hands in her lap, eyes red now. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel sorry. I just felt like something was rotting in the room, and I couldn't breathe right. I want you out, I said. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. Her eyes widened. You're serious? Dead serious. Dan, where am I supposed to go? Anywhere that isn't here. She didn't leave that night, even though I told her to. She slept in the guest room, or at least that's where she stayed with the door closed. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, not because I had questions anymore, but because every answer I got made everything worse. I knew she cheated, I knew who it was with, and I knew how long it had been going on, but the part that kept replaying in my head wasn't any of that. It was how casually she said it, how she admitted to it like she was confessing to eating the last slice of pizza. There was no emotion in her voice, no panic, no real remorse. She was only sorry she got caught, not for what she did. That made things easier for me, in a way, because it meant I didn't have to pretend this could be salvaged. I wasn't looking for a way to forgive her. I was done with all of that. What I needed now was to make sure she didn't get to walk away from this thinking she'd won anything. By the time the sun came up, I had already made up my mind. She wasn't just going to cheat and slide into some new life like I was a chapter she closed without consequences. I wasn't going to scream at her in front of her family, and I wasn't going to show up at her job to humiliate her, but I wasn't going to stay quiet either. I started by logging into our joint savings account and transferring half into a separate one under my name only. I didn't touch anything that wasn't mine. I knew better than to get messy with the bank. But what I did do was collect every bit of evidence I had. Receipts, copies of the valet tickets, photos of the hotel confirmation she left in that drawer. I printed it all out and put it into a file. Later that day, I sent a text to Eric. I didn't threaten him, didn't insult him. Just said I knew everything, and I had the receipts to back it up. Then I let him sit with that. I didn't respond when he tried to call. That wasn't the point. I wanted him to feel the pressure, and I knew that if he was anything like Melissa, he'd start unraveling the second he felt cornered. Melissa came into the kitchen around noon, acting like she hadn't just detonated our marriage the night before. She stood there awkwardly, waiting for me to speak, but I just stared at her until she finally gave up and opened the fridge. "You really want me to leave?" she asked while pouring juice like it was some casual question. "I've already started packing your stuff. You can take it tonight or tomorrow, but it's going." She didn't answer right away. She just stood there with the glass in her hand, staring into it like the answer was floating in the pulp. "I can't believe you're handling this like some cold robot," she finally said. "And I can't believe you thought you were going to cheat and sleep in my house like nothing happened. I made a mistake. You don't have to destroy me over it." "Oh, I'm not destroying you. I'm just making sure you take the weight of what you did with you." She walked out of the room, and I didn't follow. There was no point in arguing with someone who only cared about their own damage. The rest of the afternoon, I boxed up everything she had in the house that wasn't tied to me. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, her stupid collection of scarves she never wore, but insisted on displaying like they were some museum exhibit. I didn't break anything. I didn't throw it on the lawn. I stacked it neatly in the garage with a note taped to the top that said, "Don't forget anything. You won't be coming back." Then I drove to her parents' house. Her dad opened the door, surprised to see me because I never showed up without a reason. I handed him the folder and asked him to read it before she showed up. I told him she was moving out and that she'd explain why. I didn't give details. I didn't have to. I just said, "You raised her. You decide if you still want to be part of her life after this." He didn't say much, just nodded and took the folder inside. As I turned to leave, her mom came down the hallway and called my name. She didn't know yet, but she would. I just waved and kept walking. That night, when Melissa finally realized her stuff was boxed up, she came into the living room looking like she didn't recognize the house anymore. "You told my parents?" she said, voice sharp and defensive. "I told them the truth. You should have done that yourself. You had no right. I had every right. They treated me like family. They should know who you are. You just want to ruin me. No, I want you to understand that actions have weight. You thought you could cheat and just reset your life without consequences. That's not how this ends." She stood there, eyes wet but not crying, jaw clenched like she was holding something back. I waited for her to explode, for her to yell or throw something, but she didn't. She just turned and walked back into the garage where her boxes waited. The silence after she closed the garage door didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something I couldn't fix, something that had been bleeding out quietly while I thought I was just tired or stressed or working too much. She didn't say goodbye when she left. She didn't ask for one more conversation or try to beg her way back in. I think she knew there was nothing left to say. And still, I couldn't stop thinking about how easy she made it look. All that time spent pretending, hiding, faking her way through dinners and weekends, and she walked away with a car full of clothes and not a single apology worth remembering. That night, I didn't sleep again. My head wouldn't stop sorting through everything, and the longer I lay there, the more I realized that anger wasn't the strongest thing I was feeling anymore. It was confusion. I kept trying to understand how someone I lived with, laughed with, planned a future with, could turn out to be so careless with something that meant everything to me. It wasn't about the sex or even the lies anymore. It was about how little I apparently meant to her when she decided to throw it all away. At some point around 3 in the morning, I sat up, grabbed my phone, and texted her. "We need to talk. Not about us. About ending this right." She showed up the next day in the late afternoon. No warning. She knocked once and walked in, like she still had the right. I didn't say anything about that. I didn't comment on how she looked, or how tired she seemed, or how she didn't even glance around the house like she missed it. I just sat at the kitchen table and waited for her to sit across from me. She did, slowly, like she was stepping into something she already regretted. "So," she said, "what is there left to talk about? I want to hear it from you. I want to hear why. Not just how it happened. Not the timeline. I want to hear what made you look at our life and say, 'I'm done.'" She didn't answer right away. She crossed her arms, looked out the window, then finally looked at me, but not like she used to. Not with any softness. Just with a kind of numb acceptance. I stopped feeling like I was part of something. I felt like I was in a routine, like every day was just about chores and work and dinner and sleep. You were there, but you weren't really there. That's your excuse? I didn't entertain you enough? No, I'm saying I felt alone. I tried to tell you. You just kept saying things would get better once the project was over or after your work settled down. But nothing changed. So I stopped waiting. And you didn't think I felt that too? You think I was just thrilled about how things had gotten between us. I didn't think you cared anymore. That's bullshit, and you know it. I felt invisible. And your solution was to fuck someone else? I didn't plan it. You keep saying that like it makes it better. It doesn't. If anything, it makes it worse. You were so careless with it. So lazy about ruining everything. She looked down, tapping her fingers against the table, and when she looked back up, her voice was lower. I didn't want to hurt you. I know that's hard to believe, but it's the truth. You didn't want to hurt me, but you did it anyway. Over and over. You could have left. You could have told me. But you stayed. You let me keep thinking we were still in this together. She shook her head, slow and tired. I told myself it would end. That I'd wake up one day and feel something again when I looked at you. But that day never came. And you thought I'd never find out. I didn't think about it. Because you didn't care. She didn't respond, and I didn't need her to. That silence told me everything. She could say it wasn't intentional, that she was confused or lonely or disconnected, but the truth was simple. She didn't care enough to stop. She didn't care enough to protect what we had. And now that it was gone, she just wanted the ending to be painless. For her. I'm filing for divorce, I said. Tomorrow. She nodded. Okay. You'll get a lawyer. I'll get mine. We'll keep it clean. No games. But I'm not paying for anything beyond what's legally required. You can keep your car. I'll take the house. I figured as much. I'm not doing this to punish you. I just want you gone. I want the reminders gone. I want the last piece of you out of my life. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for another chance. She didn't even look sad. And maybe that's what made everything final for me. That look on her face, like she was already somewhere else, with someone else, thinking about a different future that didn't include me. I stood up first. She followed. No hug. No handshake. Just two people who used to be something walking away from whatever was left. The divorce went through faster than I expected. A few weeks of paperwork, some emails between lawyers, one court hearing where neither of us looked at each other, and that was it. 10 years together ended with signatures and a silent walk out of the building in different directions. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't want to. There was nothing left for me to say, and I wasn't going to waste another breath on someone who had already discarded me long before I even knew it was happening. After that final day in court, I drove home in complete silence, didn't turn on the radio, didn't make any phone calls. I just stared at the road and tried to feel something other than emptiness. I thought maybe I'd feel relief, maybe I'd feel some kind of weight lifted, but the only thing I felt was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that sits in your bones when you realize the version of your life you believed in wasn't real. I started boxing up everything that reminded me of her. Not out of spite, just because I didn't want to see her handwriting on sticky notes or her slippers by the bathroom door. I took the photos off the walls, cleared out the closet, and threw away every mug, plate, or towel she picked out. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about moving forward without being surrounded by reminders of who I used to be when she was still part of my world. I kept the things that were mine, the things that had nothing to do with her, and I gave the rest away or threw it in the trash. That first night in the empty house felt strange, but not painful. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet I hadn't experienced in a long time. And for once, I didn't have to wonder where she was or who she was lying to. That silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like the start of something I could finally control. A week after the divorce was finalized, she called me. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. I listened to it once and deleted it immediately. She said she just wanted to know how I was doing, that she hoped we could talk someday when the dust settled. I had nothing to say to that. She wanted closure. She wanted to soften the ending. I wasn't going to give her that. She had months to talk to me when things could have been salvaged, when we could have had a real conversation about what was broken. Instead, she chose secrets, lies, and someone else's bed. Whatever curiosity she had about my well-being now was too late, and I didn't know her any updates on how I was handling the mess she created. A few days after that, I ran into someone we both used to know, an old friend of hers from the office who hadn't picked a side. She didn't bring up Melissa right away. We made small talk about work and local stuff, but then she looked at me and said, "I heard everything that happened. I'm really sorry." I didn't respond. There was nothing for me to say. She kept going, though. She said Melissa was still seeing the same guy, but that it already looked strained, like it wasn't going how she thought it would. I listened, but I didn't react. It didn't matter to me whether Melissa was happy or miserable. I wasn't keeping score. I wasn't hoping she failed. I had already won the only thing that mattered. I had my life back, and I wasn't tied to someone who didn't respect me. The months that followed were quiet. I got used to cooking for one, watching whatever I wanted without commentary, and sleeping in the middle of the bed. I started fixing up the house a little, not because I wanted to erase her memory, but because I wanted the place to finally feel like mine. I repainted the bedroom, changed the locks, bought new furniture. It wasn't about healing or finding myself or whatever people say. It was just about building a space that didn't make me think of betrayal every time I walked through the door. One night, I sat outside on the back porch, the same place I used to sit when she would call and say she'd be late, back when I still believed her. I sat there with a beer, staring at the yard we used to talk about turning into a garden, and I realized something I hadn't thought about before. I didn't miss her, not the real her. I missed the version I thought she was, the person I believed I was sharing my life with. That person never existed. The woman I married, the one I promised everything to, she wasn't the same woman who lied and cheated and walked away without looking back. She was someone I created in my head, and when she left, that illusion disappeared with her. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sad either. I'm just done. I don't care what she tells people or how she rewrites the story. I know what happened. I lived it. I watched her walk away from something good without a second thought. That's not something I'll forget, and it's not something I'll forgive. But it's something I've accepted. I'm moving on. Not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because I've finally reached a place where her choices don't define me anymore.